Clara Mackenzie knelt beside the creek, scrubbing desperately at her palms as the crimson swirled away in the current. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, dirt streaked across her cheek, and her breathing came in sharp, painful gasps. Every few seconds, she'd glance back toward the ridge where smoke still rose like a black finger against the evening sky. "It hurts too much," she whispered to the water, her voice cracking. That's when she heard the hoofbeats. A lone rider emerged from the cottonwoods, his silhouette dark against the dying light. He sat easy in the saddle, hat pulled low, but Clara could feel his eyes on her, even from a distance. She scrambled backward, her boots slipping on the muddy bank. The rider dismounted slowly, hands visible, movements deliberate. "Easy, miss," he said, his voice carrying the roughness of a man who'd seen too much. "Name's Zeke Morgan. I'm not here to hurt you." Clara's hand found the small revolver at her hip, her father's gun, the one she'd never thought she'd need. "Stay back," she managed, though her voice wavered like creek water over stones. Zeke stopped 10 feet away, close enough that she could see the kindness in his weathered face, the way his gray eyes softened when he looked at her. He was older than her by maybe 15 years, with the kind of quiet strength that came from facing down death and walking away. "That fire on the ridge," he said gently. "That your place?" Clara's composure shattered. The sob that escaped her was raw, desperate, the sound of someone who had lost everything in the span of an hour. She nodded, unable to speak. "And the blood on your hands?" She looked down at her palms, still pink despite her scrubbing. "My paw," she whispered. They made me watch." Zeke's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "Who did this?" "The Garrett boys. Said Pa owed them money from a poker game. Said," she swallowed hard, "said I could work off the debt." The silence that followed was loaded like a cocked hammer. Zeke's hand drifted toward his gun belt, then stopped. In the distance, the sound of multiple horses echoed off the canyon walls. They were coming back. "How many?" Zeke asked, his voice sharp now, all business. "4, Clara said, wiping her eyes with the back of her sleeve. "Maybe 5. I ran when they started drinking, not if we're smart about it. And then what?" Her voice was bitter now, age beyond her 22 years. "I run for the rest of my life? Hide like some wounded animal?" The hoofbeats were getting closer, echoing off the canyon walls like thunder. Zeke could make out voices now, rough laughter, the clink of bottles. They were drunk, which made them dangerous in ways that sober men weren't. "There's another way," Zeke said quietly. Clara looked at him, seeing something shift in his expression. "What way?" "I stay. Face them down." "That's suicide. You said it yourself. There's 4 or 5 of them." Zeke's smile was grim. "I've beaten worse odds." Clara studied his face, seeing scars she hadn't noticed before. A thin white line along his jaw, another that disappeared under his collar. This wasn't a farmer or a shopkeeper. This was a man who had made his living with his gun. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you do that for me?" Zeke studied the terrain with the practiced eye of a man who'd survived more fights than he'd started. The creek offered cover, but not much. The rocks provided some protection, but against 5 men, it would be suicide. "Listen to me," he said, catching her chin gently, forcing her to meet his eyes. "I can get you out of here. My horse can carry double if we ride hard. We'll be in Silver Creek by dawn." Clara shook her head. "They'll follow. They'll find me." Zeke was quiet for a long moment, listening to the approaching riders. "Because someone should have done it for my sister." The words hung between them like smoke. Clara felt something shift in her chest, a recognition of shared pain. "It hurts too much," she said again, but this time it wasn't about the blood or the fire or her father's death. It was about the weight of being alone in a world that took everything from you. "That's why I'm here," Zeke replied, and his voice was soft as prayer. The first rider appeared on the ridge above them, silhouetted against the last light, then another, then 3 more. The Garrett boys had found them. "Well, well," called out the lead rider, his voice slurred with whiskey and mean with intent. "Looks like our little dove found herself a protector." Tom Garrett was a big man, thick through the chest and shoulders, with the kind of cruel mouth that enjoyed inflicting pain. His brothers flanked him, Jake with his nervous laugh, Billy with his dead eyes, and young Pete who tried too hard to prove he belonged. The 5th man Clara didn't recognize, but the way he sat his horse, the way his hand rested casual-like on his gun butt, told her everything she needed to know. They'd brought a killer. "Evening, boys," Zeke said, stepping slightly in front of Clara. His voice was conversational, almost friendly. "Beautiful night for a ride." Tom Garrett laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You picked the wrong woman to White Knight for, stranger. This here's a family matter." "Funny thing about family," Zeke replied. "Sometimes blood ain't thicker than decency." The stranger's eyes narrowed. Clara could see him sizing Zeke up, cataloging the worn grip of his Colt, the way he stood balanced on the balls of his feet. Professional, recognizing, professional. "You know who I am?" Tom asked, leaning forward in his saddle. "Can't say I do," Zeke said, "but I know what you are." The insult hit Tom like a slap. His face darkened, and Clara saw his hand move toward his gun. Big words for a man who's outnumbered 5-1. "Mathematics was never my strong suit," Zeke admitted, "but I can count to 5 just fine." Billy Garrett giggled, high and nervous. "He's got sand, Tom. Gotta give him that." "Sand don't stop bullets," the stranger said quietly. It was the first time he had spoken, and his voice was like gravel in a tin cup. "Walk away, mister. This don't concern you." Zeke's smile was winter cold. "See, that's where you're wrong. Lady says it hurts too much. That makes it my concern." Clara felt tears prick her eyes, but not from fear this time. No one had ever stood for her like this. Not even her own father, God rest his soul. "Last chance," Tom said, his hand now openly resting on his gun. "Ride out, or we'll plant you right next to her daddy." The silence that followed was broken only by the creek's gentle murmur and the creak of leather as horses shifted. Clara could smell the gun oil on Zeke's belt, could feel the coiled tension in his body. "Well then," Zeke said softly, "I reckon we understand each other." His hand dropped to his gun, and the canyon exploded into violence. The first shot came from the stranger, fast and clean, but Zeke was already moving. He dove left, rolling behind a boulder as the bullet whined off stone where he'd been standing. Clara scrambled for cover as chaos erupted around her. Zeke's return shot took Billy Garrett clean out of his saddle. The man hit the ground hard and didn't move. The horses reared and screamed, adding to the confusion. "Son of a—" Tom's curse was cut short as Zeke's second shot punched him in the shoulder, spinning him around. He managed to stay mounted, but his gun hand was useless now. Jake Garrett fired wild, his bullet going high. Young Pete was trying to control his spooked horse and draw his gun at the same time, succeeding at neither. The stranger was the real threat. He'd dismounted and taken cover behind a fallen log, and his shots were coming steady and accurate. Splinters of rock stung Clara's face as bullets sparked off her hiding place. "Clara!" Zeke shouted over the gunfire. "Can you shoot?" She looked down at her father's revolver, her hands shaking. I think so." "Don't think, do. That one behind the log. He's the dangerous one." Clara forced herself to breathe, to remember what her father had taught her about shooting rabbits for dinner. She steadied the gun against the rock, lined up the sights, and squeezed the trigger. Her shot went wide, but it was close enough to make the stranger duck. That gave Zeke the opening he needed. He rose from cover like an avenging angel, his Colt booming twice in quick succession. The stranger's hat flew off his head, and then he was falling backward, his gun spinning away into the creek. Young Pete threw down his weapon, hands raised high. "I surrender! Don't shoot! I surrender!" Jake Garrett was bleeding from a graze on his arm, but he had lost all fight. Tom sat his horse, swaying, his face gray with shock and pain. "It's over," Zeke said, but he kept his gun drawn. Clara stood on shaking legs, her father's revolver heavy in her hands. The acrid smell of gunpowder hung in the air like incense. 3 men were down, 2 wounded, 1 fled into the gathering darkness. "I came back for me," she whispered, the words barely audible over the ringing in her ears. Zeke looked at her, and for a moment, his weathered face was soft with something she couldn't quite name. "Told you I would." "Why?" He was quiet for a long time, reloading his gun with practiced efficiency. "My sister's name was Emma," he said finally. "She was about your age when the Comancheros took her. I never found her, never got the chance to stand up for her like I should have." Clara felt her heart break a little for this quiet man who carried his grief like a stone in his chest. The sheriff arrived at dawn, bringing with him a doctor and 3 deputies. Tom Garrett was patched up and shackled, Jake likewise. Young Pete turned state's evidence in exchange for leniency. The stranger, a hired gun named Coulter, was beyond earthly justice. Self-defense, Sheriff Morrison declared after hearing the story. Clear as mountain water. Clara stood at her father's grave, a simple wooden cross marking the spot where they'd laid him to rest. The ashes of the homestead had long since cooled, but the memory of flames still burned in her mind. "What will you do now?" Zeke asked quietly. He'd stayed for the funeral, though she could see the restlessness in him, the need to move on that seemed to live in the bones of men like him. "I don't know," she admitted. "Pa didn't leave much. The land's not worth anything without the house and barn." Zeke was quiet for a moment, looking out over the valley where morning mist clung to the grass like silk. "I got a place up in Colorado territory," he said finally. "Small ranch, nothing fancy. Could use someone who knows how to handle a gun and isn't afraid of hard work." Clara looked at him, seeing the offer for what it was, not charity, but partnership. "What kind of arrangement are you proposing, Mr. Morgan?" His smile was like sunrise after the longest night, the kind where a man and woman face the world together, where it hurts too much becomes something we say to the past, not the future. She studied his face, seeing strength and kindness and the promise of something she'd never dared hope for. "And if I say yes? Then we ride north together, build something worth keeping." Clara took his offered hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of honest work, the steadiness that had saved her life. "It hurts too much to stay here," she said. "That's why I'm here," he replied. They rode out as the sun climbed higher, two figures against the vast sky. Behind them, the grave marker stood sentinel over the valley, and the wind whispered through the grass like a benediction. Years later, when her children asked about their father, Clara would tell them about the day a quiet cowboy appeared by a creek and changed everything. She'd tell them about courage and kindness, about how sometimes love arrives in the form of a stranger willing to stand against the darkness. But first, she'd always say, came the words that saved her. "It hurts too much." And the reply that gave her hope. "That's why I'm here." The last light caught their silhouettes as they crested the ridge, heading toward tomorrow, leaving yesterday buried in the dust behind them.